Welcome. In today's podcast, we're going to be talking about 5 tips for getting our financial house in order. This is one of those educational pieces of our Widow Wisdom and Wealth podcast, Thriving in Career and Parenthood After Loss. Because for many of us, when we first experience loss, the world is spinning and we just need some simple steps, some simple foundations to step off from. So here we are. Welcome. Give a listen. Hi, and welcome to another version of Widow Wisdom and Wealth, our podcast for thriving in career and parenthood after loss. In our podcast, we will be interviewing widows and widowers, sharing a little bit about their story and their family life before the loss of their parent, of their partner or their spouse, and then how they kind of carried on. How did they change their careers, expand their careers, maybe put their careers on hold for a little bit so that they could be their best parents, being those sole parents, and raising our children alone, and sharing our journeys, sharing our wisdom, sharing our biggest challenges, sharing where we gave ourselves grace. In today's version, we're not going to have an interview. We're going to talk a little bit about myself as a widow back in 2013 and some of the helpful tips that really helped me to get my financial house in order, so that I could understand my next best steps in my career. How much money did I need to make? When did I need to start making that money? What kind of benefits did I need? And when I actually started earning an income again that was substantial, how much do I have to save for retirement? A lot of those conversations couldn't happen until I understood my own financial house. So I thought this was really important to share as one of our opening Widow Wisdom and Wealth special editions for thriving in career and parenthood after loss, because it is truly the foundation to what set me mm, on my journey. What allowed me the parameters to make decisions by. I really had to understand where I was at that very moment before I could create a roadmap. I always imagine like a chutes and ladders board game where you actually have like your little start and then you can go this way. Sometimes you can take a ladder straight up. Sometimes you get on the slippery slide and you go all the way back down. Doesn't that game just really emulate a lot of life, right? So like Greg and I were like bobbing and weaving and back stateside, and we had bought our first house, or bought our house in Philadelphia after many years of living abroad. And I was working part-time and I was raising my kids. And then he passed away. And when he passed away, that paycheck stopped. Right. And at that point in time, we didn't have a lot of cash on hand because we had used all of our cash savings to put a down payment on a house in the Philadelphia area while we sold our house in the Lehigh Valley, about an hour and a half above Philadelphia. So when he died, I didn't really have a lot of cash on hand. I had just enough to cover the next month's bills. It takes a little bit of time to get life insurance money in. I had to afford his funeral, which, by the way, I put the life insurance money against, to pay. I didn't have money put aside. And I canceled a lot of his credit cards because he had passed, and that's the right thing to do. But I didn't realize that I did not have a lot of credit in my own name. I was the authorized user on many of his credit cards. So after the dust settled, after the kids got back to school, I got back to work, and I had found a new financial advisor to work with myself. I was not a financial advisor at that time. He took me through some of these steps to understand exactly where I stood financially, because it was only from that foundation, that starting point on the chutes and ladders board game, that I was able to make the next best steps. Now, years later, I've recreated my career. I am a financial advisor and I give advice to families in transition. And this is truly one of those first conversations I have. And so, yeah, why wouldn't I put this into our podcast? So you guys can all listen and kind of learn and know when I share my story, when I'm leading other widows and widowers to share their stories, that sometimes this understanding how to get our own financial house in order is one of those first things we do. And hopefully through our interviews with other widows and widowers who are also sole parents and career minded, we can kind of figure out, how did that work for them? How did they get their financial house in order? So here are the 5 steps that I used. The first one was understanding my own net worth. So net worth was really an understanding of what did I own, what was in my name, maybe what was in Greg's name that we had to claim or settle a probate estate for. Luckily, Greg and I worked with a financial advisor when we were in our 20s. So when we lost Greg when I was 40, he was 42, we had the house titled in both of our names. We had cars titled in his name or my name. I had estate documents done so that I could say, yes, I am the 100% beneficiary of his estate, of which the car was. We had Social Security in my name and in his name. We also had some credit cards in his name. I was an authorized user on them. I had a credit card in my own name, which allowed me to have my credit history. But let's go back to the net worth. Our bank accounts, what was held jointly? They both were. So my net worth was really the value of anything we had in our banking accounts, our retirement accounts, his 401k. He worked for the government, so they called it a TSP account. Sometimes if you work for hospital or an education is a 403B, maybe a nonprofit. So we had his 401k, of which I was beneficiary designated. So that fell outside of the will. The money came straight to me into what ultimately became a traditional IRA in my name. So that was part of my net worth, our retirement savings, what we had in our bank accounts, the car, and the value we had in the home. I had to understand that net worth to be able to make decisions on what my next best step was. Because Greg and I had life insurance, the value of the life insurance would also come into my net worth when that settled. So when I sat with my new financial advisor after a few weeks of widowhood, we looked at the value of the life insurance policies. That came to me tax-free, a value of what he might have been making, a multiple at his employer, plus a policy that we had had. It was called a variable universal life policy of a payout of blank amount of dollars. So those 2 funds came into the value of my net worth. When we also figure out our net worth, we have to figure out what is liquid and what is not. The value of the house was not liquid cash unless I sold the house. That was equity value that I had in the house. Life insurance, that was liquid, came to me as cash. But part of my net worth is also how much did I owe? I've shared. Greg and I had just bought that house. So we had a nice 30-year mortgage on a $300,000 house, and we just had our sweet little 20% down. So a lot of my net worth was mitigated. Or when I talk about the value of life insurance, well, we offset that with the value of the liability that I had for cars, the liability I had for a mortgage. So my net worth. What do you own? What's in your name? For many of us, it's retirement accounts, properties, as well as our bank accounts, maybe some investment accounts if we were lucky enough to have them, and minus our liabilities. What do we owe? Do we have mortgages on rental property, cars, our own personal mortgage, short-term debt, credit cards? That will give us our net worth. That is a starting point. The next thing we want to figure out of our 5 steps was our flows of income. So where did I have a flow of income prior to Greg's passing and then afterwards? I had his earnings, his paycheck every 2 weeks prior to his passing. Well, that was going to stop. So I had my own income. I had the ability to have Social Security benefits from my kids. When we first sat down with my financial advisor, I didn't even know how to approach that. He helped me with understanding the next best steps to applying for Social Security. What information did I have to bring with me to the Social Security office? A few years ago, I wrote a book called A Guide to Widowhood, Navigating the Next Best Steps. And there are downloadables there and chapters that teach you what to bring to Social Security, how to find out your net worth, how to find out your flows of income. So we'll put a reference in the bottom of this podcast. So you can go ahead and take a look at our website, see if you can get a hold of those free downloadables. My gift to you. Enjoy. So flows of income, right? Maybe Greg, he had a pension. We didn't know how much that was going to be, but I knew that was going to be a flow of income. And then how much did I earn at that time? Again, I've shared in previous podcasts, I made a little bit over $17,000 that year in 2013. That wasn't going to keep the lights on, listeners. It wasn't. But when we added in the Social Security benefits for the kids, when we added in if there was a pension coming in from Greg, when we added in my own income, was that enough to cover the mortgage? Was that enough to keep food on the table? And if not, did I have to take from either savings, life insurance money to help supplement daily life, or did I have to sell the house and move somewhere with not as big a mortgage or rent instead, or live with extended family for a while to keep myself afloat? Those were the decisions that we had to make. And so for myself, there was a little bit of a waiting game there to understand the flow of income because we had to wait to get a prediction of what his pension was going to be. And I had to wait to hear back from Social Security to see what the benefits for my kids were. They are based on about 75% of what Greg's benefit was at the time. And so that took a little bit of putting things into action and then finding out um, what those numbers look like, right? Because I also had to say flows of income, what's going out, right? What am I paying in that mortgage? What am I paying on these car payments? What am I paying for health insurance if it's out of pocket or is that going to be part of Greg's pension? And can I afford daily living? So a lot of that is our step three, understanding what it costs you to be you. Kind of when you do that flow of income of what comes in and what goes out, for many of us, we're looking at our debit card transaction. We're looking at our checkbooks if we have them. Back then, I still had a checkbook. So I kind of understood how much it cost me and Greg to run our house right outside of Philadelphia and to pay for car insurance and the kids' football and to feed the kids. For many of us nowadays, it's really a debit card or maybe one or two credit cards that we use, right? And we can use one of those tools. We have them here in my own practice of financial planning. We call it spending and transaction analysis, right? But there's many apps out there that you can track your credit card spending, or sometimes on the portal for the credit card themselves. So literally understanding how much do I spend on average in daily living. And then we have to kind of get a highlighter, print out that last three statements of the credit card. I live life on American Express. So if I was going through this activity with my current husband, Jim, I'd print out the last 3 months of American Express. And we would highlight what is lifestyle and what is a basic need. What is the heat, the gas, electricity, not eating out, basic groceries, car insurance, car payments, mortgages, taxes. What does that feel for that month? And that is what I call the cost of what it is to be me. Those are the basic expenses. Now we can get a different color highlighter and then we can layer on our lifestyle, memberships to the gym, Netflix and some of those streaming services. What does that cost? That doesn't really go into the basics. Those are some lifestyles. So what's the difference between our basic and our lifestyle? Wow. And if you're in a relationship, that's a big conversation once you find out that number. Whew. Mm. Pull back a little bit. We all kind of do it in the New Year's, right? Like, I'm going to save money. I'm going to get out of debt. We kind of do this activity, whether it's just noodling it in our head or whether we're sitting on a piece of paper or if we're using an app. But what you really want to do is realize what is the cost to be me, that if I didn't pay these bills, it was going to affect my credit or the lights were going to go off. Get that number because that's really important, especially in the first few months and years of widowhood when you're making these bigger decisions like how much do I need to make if I go back to work? And can I continue to keep my house and living here? Or do I need to move to a suburb or rent or move in with family? Do we need to stop eating out? Or I always call it, is it a box of pasta and tomato sauce type of month? Right? Like where maybe it's almost like that budget when we lived in college, right? Where we didn't have a lot of proteins in our diets and we were just trying to fill ourselves on rice and noodles. I don't know if that is how other people lived in college, but it's pretty much how we survived. Um, yeah. What's the cost of being you? And why do we want that number? Because that's step four. We want to understand what our cash reserve needs to be. For many of us in widowhood, we went from having someone's income right? Or maybe both of us earning an income to one person, just me, right? Maybe with a little help with Social Security, maybe with a little help with a pension. Maybe that doesn't exist for many of us, especially if you're widowed in a younger year and your spouse didn't have a lot of Social Security credits earned. It can be really hard. It can be tight. So what you want to understand is, what does it cost to be you? And now that you're on your own, your emergency fund, your cash reserve, your rainy day fund is going to be about 6 months of that number because it's your income. When we go back and we look at those flows of income, some are guaranteed, some are variable, right? We have to understand, are those flows of income enough? Can they end at a certain point? Benefits for our kids in Social Security many of times can end when they turn 18 or graduate from high school, whichever comes first sometimes. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I think for me, yeah, my oldest child, James, turned 18 while he was in high school. So we got his Social Security extended, his survivor benefit on his dad, up until the month before his graduation, where my other kids were younger. So theirs continued until their 18th birthday. But I always say, go to Social Security, SSA.gov, or talk to your Social Security agency for some guidance on that, especially if your kids have a disability or anything like that, whole different ball of wax. But I knew at a certain point when Social Security was going to end. So I was able to guide myself into, what do I need to be making to supplement or to replace that missing Social Security as my kids aged. And that was really guiding for myself as I recreated my career of, I need to make X amount of money by the time my son Connor graduates college, to one, afford college, and two, to replace what I was dependent on in Social Security while I got my feet underneath me after Greg's passing. So, one, understand our next worth. Two, understand our flow of income. Three, understand the basic cost of what it takes to be you, as well as lifestyle. And four, of that basic cost of what it costs you to be you, let's multiply that times six. And that's going to be the cash reserve. That's money that we want to have put aside in cash that we can get to pretty easy. The liquid funds that are saving, might be sitting in a savings account, maybe in a money market, maybe in a CD, but something we can get to pretty quickly should maybe we get laid off, right? Or maybe there's a problem with our bank account and the Social Security deposit didn't come through. If you don't have kids and you're on your own, maybe it's that, uh-oh, we had a flood in the basement and it wasn't covered by insurance. So we need to pay out of pocket for this. The cash reserve is one of our biggest savings goals when we move into widowhood, providing support for our kids as sole parents. And the very last step for getting your financial house in order is understanding your credit. I think I've shared on previous podcasts that, I was an authorized user on many of Greg's credit cards. So there was really only one credit card company that had my length of credit that I could keep and carry forward with me. And your length of credit history impacts your credit score. Availability to credit and percentage of credit used, that impacts your credit score. Debt to income ratio, right? I wasn't making much an income in the very beginning. That impacts your credit score. Um, so I really understand the importance of credit when I had to put our life insurance policies against the cost of Greg's funeral. Ooh, and I didn't have enough credit on credit cards to be able to charge groceries 2 weeks later. That was a humbling experience. So, what I want all of my widows and widowers to do is to understand what their credit score is. Many of us can get that from some of our credit cards, some of our banks. It's what we refer to as our FICO score. We have a whole other podcast in our podcast history of widow wisdom and wealth before we kind of changed our format to have these beautiful conversations with other widows and widowers in parenthood as a sole parent and raising their careers about what goes into your credit score. But you want like the mid 700s to get some good credit rating. In your 800s, oof, that's a nice feeling. If you're below 700s, ooh, we might have to have some work, or we might be paying higher interest costs if we go for a mortgage in our own name, or if we're trying to afford a car in our own name. So we want to understand the strength of our credit. But more than anything, I always say to my clients to run your own credit report, and that's www.annualcreditreport.com. And from there, you can get a free copy each year from each of the three major credit reporting agencies. I just say don't do all three at once. Do one, 3 months, and then 4 months later, do another one if you need to, and save that last one in case there's maybe some type of credit scandal, right? Someone takes your identity or something. But for many of my widows and widowers, as well as what an activity I did for myself, is I pulled the annualcreditreport.com and I used that as a guide to say, okay, what's in my name? What credit cards are still out there that were maybe in Greg's name that I didn't know about that still had debt on them? I need to contact those credit card companies. I need to understand what is a liability of mine and Greg estate, what might be something that was released from Greg because it was maybe a purchase that wasn't used to support the household. I didn't know how to go about that, as well as where we might have had where we had to pay some credit if it was something that a bill that maybe Greg took care of and I didn't. For many of my clients, they've lost a spouse that handled the daily or monthly budgeting of the house. For me, I had everything. I'm the one who paid those bills, but I still used my annual credit report as a double check, right? Double check that against my checks. Double check that about my annual spending. Did it make sense according to my tax documents? But on that credit report, you can find out the activities or the accounts that are open, whether there were any missed payments, perhaps the percentage of credit due, what's in your name, what's held jointly. Because remember, your credit score can be impacted if we hold accounts jointly, even though the other person might have missed the payment. It would affect us both. But yeah, use that annual credit report as a guide, as a starting point to understand that you are aware of all of the accounts open. You are aware of your credit strength. You are aware of the payments that have to come out in the next few months while you're trying to figure out income, while you're trying to figure out what to pay off first, who to contact. So those are my tips for many of my clients starting out, as well as myself. And this was the framework I was given of how to get my own financial house in order in those first few months after loss. And I'm really excited to compare and contrast with my interviews moving forward and my guests to see how did you figure out what got your financial house in order. So let's recap. 1, net worth. 2, flows of income. 3, cost of what it cost you to be you. 4, setting up that cash reserve, liquid accounts with about 6 months of that basic living expense, what it cost me to be me. And 5, getting that credit report, understanding my own credit strengths and using that credit report as a guide to who I need to contact, what kind of funds I need to have available in the next few months to pay my credit and to keep it afloat. And then almost as a triage of what needs to stay open and what needs to close and the strength of my credit history moving forward. So I hope that this quick 5 steps of how to keep our financial house in order has been helpful. And I think as we share our journeys and our stories moving forward, we can compare how we all did it. And maybe when we're holding someone's hand in widowhood in the future, because when we are widows and widowers, many times people come to us to say, hey, you've been here. What do I do next? So maybe together we can share some of this wisdom. Thank you so much for joining us on the Widow Wisdom and Wealth podcast, Thriving in Career and Parenthood After Loss. Have a good one.